3, 2, 1. Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending my lightning talk. Happy to see you here. I am Allison Ralph. I'm the Associate Director of the Religion and Society program at the Aspen Institute. I lead our religion and philanthropy initiatives. I want to start by breaking the taboo on talking about religion. It is an absolute minefield of a subject. It's full of our personal and collective hurts. There's lots of reasons that folks have a hard time talking about religion and tend to avoid talking about it, including in the funding space. But one of the downsides is that because so many folks are uncomfortable talking about religion, that also means that philanthropists tend to miss out on funding faith-inspired institutions. And faith-inspired institutions make up almost 40% of our national nonprofit landscape. So it's a huge chunk of the landscape. And I'm going to talk first about what that really means when we miss out on that sector. So of our nonprofit landscape, about 25% of it is congregations, houses of worship. In addition to that, there's also another 15%, or that's about 228,000 faith-inspired nonprofits doing secular work in the world. And so you might think of the YMCA or Habitat for Humanity. These faith-inspired nonprofits can be fabulous grantee partners because the data shows that they tend to be older, have more volunteers, generate more revenue, and receive more donations. All of that is in comparison to their secular counterparts doing the same thing. So they're very well set up as nonprofit organizations. And also because they have those cultural and religious literacy competencies, they can be more trusted in minority or marginalized communities. So they're really, really great partners. You don't want to give up on funding them just as a matter of course. But many funders do have concerns about working with faith-inspired organizations. As I already said, religion is a minefield in the States. There are things to be concerned about. You might have legitimate concerns about proselytizing or restrictions in who can access services or restrictive hiring practices, all kinds of things. We'll walk through those in this handy-dandy guide. Please check it out at tinyurl.com, BWITP, for But What If They Preach. What I'm going to do today is a little more, it's a little different than the guide itself. I recommend the guide, but what I'm going to do here is something a little different, which is to walk through 2 different case studies of a potential match between a circle, a giving circle, and a beneficiary, and look at how their missions align and how the values of the circle align or don't align with the practices of the organization they're considering funding. So for this purpose, I have made up a couple of pairings. I've totally invented the circles, to be honest, but the nonprofits that I'm going to discuss are real nonprofits that have been anonymized. So these really are organizations that are out there in the world doing something very similar to what I present them doing here. So let's dig in. The first one is a pairing around climate change. So we have the circle on the left, the circle for climate change. Their mission is to reduce climate change and its impacts as quickly as possible. On the right, we have the Florentine Nuns for Climate Action. Their mission is to pursue the common good for our common home. The Florentine Nuns, which this is not a real Catholic order, by the way, this is a made-up name for them. As I said, this is a real organization, based on a real organization. They do international policy work. Their target audience is Catholics around the world, particularly conservative Catholics. And they're great at creating behavior change among conservative Catholics around personal resource use and voting changes and voting for policies that will make a difference in the world in this mission. So we already know this is a great match on the mission. Here, I'm going to color this green. What I'm going to do along the bottom row is look at how the circle's values line up against the practices of this potential beneficiary. So on the left, let's start here. The Circle for Climate Change they really prefer to work with organizations that have totally non-restrictive hiring practices. This is not a perfect match here because it turns out that because this is an organization attached to a Catholic order, only senior nuns can run the organization at the top levels. And so although they don't have otherwise restrictive practices, they'll hire anybody to work in the office. You're never going to get to that leadership position within the organization. So it's not a perfect match. This circle has a strong disinclination for proselytizing, for folks actually trying to convert participants. So the work of the Florentine nuns in this case is not proselytizing, even though their programs include prayer and hymn singing and scriptural readings, those kinds of things. Because their audience actually is Catholic already, they're not trying to convert anyone here. And a lot of this Catholic worship activities that are part of the programming is actually part of the strategy to move Catholics to change their behaviors. And that's good because it's effective. And so this is not a flag, turns out. The circle does have a lot of generally progressive social values. And that does conflict with some of the other social values held by the Florentine nuns in particular, or the Catholic Church in general. So, for example, the Florentine nuns do their work for climate action because they view it as part of the right to life, or because they see the sacred value of all life. And so that's why climate action is particularly important to them. And of course, they're part of the Catholic Church, which disapproves of active gay sexual relationships and of bars women from ministry, for example, or from the priesthood, I should say. So this is not a great match. This match does make the circle uncomfortable in a number of ways. The circle does really appreciate having data to show fiduciary responsibility. That is a little bit of a flag because this organization is attached to technically what the IRS calls a church, and so it does not file 990s. This organization does, however, have an auditor, a professional auditor, review their books, and they publish that audit openly. So this is not perfect, but it'll do. And finally, the Circle for Climate Change is really, really interested in data-driven results. And that's a great match, actually, for this group, because these folks are really into monitoring and evaluation. They can really show their rate of change for behavior for the folks that they participate in their programming, because they have this fabulous record of strategic success. Okay, so that's the sort of outline of how a few things that might be problematic line up or don't. Now, the next step for this circle, because this doesn't look super great, it's a mixed bag, right? How do they proceed forward? The next step for them would be to prioritize their own values, to ask, okay, which of these things are most valuable to us? In the case where there might be conflicts of values, how do we figure out what's most important to us and to do? And it turns out when they do that prioritization, that the data-driven results piece, that's the most valuable to them. That's where they're really headed in order to get to their mission. That's really important to them. It's also really important to them that an organization is not proselytizing, and that's a match too. This fiduciary responsibility, they have a workaround for this data. This non-restrictive hiring piece is not great, but it's not terrible, sort of understandable since it's a Catholic order. And this one, in this case, because this organization is not using its time and resources to push forward those social values that conflict with the circle's values, in this case, it's acceptable to them. These nuns may not have the same personal values as the members of the circle do, but they're not out there trying to ban gay marriage. It's not what their work is in the world. So in this case, after that review, the circle decides that, great, this is a good match, and we're going to go forward. Sorry about that. So we're going to go forward to the next example. So on the left, again, is our circle. This is the Rural Minority Support Circle. They empower and revitalize rural minority communities. And we're going to try to pair them with the Rural Muslim Network, which empowers marginalized communities. Again, this is a great match on the face of it in terms of mission. So let's proceed to look at where there might be other faith-oriented values conflicts. All right, so the first thing that I want to say is that actually this is great. This group comes at this work of revitalizing rural communities out of Latinx and migrant orientations. That's their personal identities or the families that they come from. And so they're trying to give back to those communities. And so they have come to this work with that orientation, and that's the communities that they originally intended to fund was other migrant and Latinx communities when they are working with the Rural Muslim Network, which, by the way, is a Black Muslim network, majority Black network. They are interested in this community as another marginalized community, but also it's important to them that this organization supports everybody else who's in their community, regardless of faith identity, religious identity, ethnic identity, all of those things. They are working in majority Black communities, but they're supporting everybody who's there. So no flags on that, which is great. This group also is majority Christian because they come from Latinx communities, which means, and they are, like most Latinx folks, either evangelical or Catholic, and fairly socially conservative as well. And because of that, they don't know, it just happens that they don't know a lot of Muslims. They don't know a whole lot about Islam. And so that creates some concern for them, mostly out of just a lack of knowledge. So let's kind of dig into this a little bit. So because they just don't know a lot about Islam, that lack of knowledge is filled in by general cultural misapprehensions and misunderstandings about Islam and Muslims. And so they are concerned about the status of women in this Black Muslim community. I'm not suggesting that funders should be concerned about it. I'm naming this as something that happens to Muslim-led nonprofits, that this is something that they hear from funders a lot. And I know that because there's a lot of Muslim-led nonprofits in my network, and they tell me that they hear concerns about the fact that these groups are associated with Islam, and there's all of these sort of cultural misapprehensions about them. So I want to name that as something that groups like this one are facing. The other concern here is about non-Christian proselytizing. Because this group is Christian, the circle is Christian, and this Black Muslim group they're unapologetically Muslim, and they do include prayer and scriptural readings in their public programming. So that feels worrying to this Christian group that, again, doesn't know much about Islam. So what they need to do in this case is just ask real questions and ask open questions of this potential grantee. When it comes down to it, they look into the status of women in the community. They find out that 60% of the board members are women. They find out a high percentage of staff, including leadership level staff, are women in the community. And so their fears are allayed, their unfounded fears are allayed on this issue. And when they talk to the grantee about proselytizing and about what's happening in their programming, what they find is that these folks are including praise. It's more like including praise rather than preaching. But yes, that they are including scriptural readings and prayer in a program that's open to everybody. But they're doing that more as a sign of thanks to God and as a show of why they come to the work rather than trying to convert anyone No one is required to be Muslim. The benefits of the nonprofit are open to everybody, regardless of racial, ethnic, religious identity, et cetera. So that idea of praise actually resonates pretty well with this Christian group. Still not super comfortable with it, but they do understand it. It resonates with them. And so this is not terrible. And then again, we're going to reorder these values. And their most important thing for this circle is that this group, the Rural Muslim Network, is fantastic at doing what they do, which is land development, strategic economic development, local leadership development, where they're really building up the communities as they exist in a particular place, and they're including the residents. If you are a neighbor, you're in. And that is really important to this minority support circle. And so for that reason, we're going to go ahead and say, yes, again, this is a match. This is great. So fabulous. We now have 2 matches between our circles and our faith-inspired nonprofits. Of course, I'm not suggesting that every investigation will end this way, but there's 2 examples of how you might walk through these values concerns and end up becoming comfortable with funding faith-inspired nonprofits. So what are the first steps? First, look at your potential beneficiaries that you already have in your pipeline. If there are those there that are faith-inspired and that gives you a pause, first talk within your own circle about potential concerns. Talk with your grantees, which I should have written here and didn't. And then, of course, read the guide for more information. And do feel free to get in touch with me. Again, Allison Ralph, aka Ralph18 at Twitter, or allison.ralph@aspeninstitute.org. Thank you again for your attention. Thanks for everything that you all are doing in the world. And I look forward to hearing from you. Take care.